One of the things I don't see talked about nearly enough in the writing community is the importance of reading while you are writing your own projects. And that's why today and next week, we wanted to bring you a two-part video on the importance and the how-to of reading like a writer. Stay tuned.
You've been writing your memoir, maybe even for years. You know your material, you know what it means. What's missing isn't the story, it's the structure. And that's why we started the Memoir Method Book Club. Every single month, Emily Thrash, a professional writer and editor, teaches you how to read like a writer by breaking down a published memoir and showing you what it's doing under the surface. Your first session is free. Head over to pageandpodium.com/book club to sign up.
One of my most overlooked components of the Memoir Method, our group program for women working on their first memoirs, are our Friday accountability checks. Now, you have no doubt heard me talk a lot about this program, how we combine accountability, education, and community to move women forward on these projects and make sure they are excellent. But one of those components is the Friday accountability. Now, this is just a form that goes out every single week, and it asks people that are in the group to answer just a set of questions just to help make sure that they're on track. Now, of course, as I have discussed about Friday accountabilities before, these accountability checks give us a lot of information on where you're struggling, where you might need help. But we also ask some strategic questions of our members just to make sure that they are giving themselves every advantage possible. And one of the questions that we ask every single week is, what are you reading? Now, sometimes I find that people are surprised by this question, but really, we shouldn't be. When we think about the single most important factor in our ability to write the way we want to write is our exposure to other types of excellent writing. And the best way to make sure you are consistently exposed to excellent writing is to read. So that's why in this two-part video series, we're going to talk not only about why it's important to read like a writer, but also how to do that. And part of that is the lead into our newest offering, our Memoir Method Book Club. Now, you saw in the little bumper ad that we had just at the beginning of this video that our book club is just effectively a place to come together. Emily Thrash, who has an MFA, she leads our Memoir Method group program weekly calls, as well as our voice workshops that we have once a month. She is going to be stepping into the role of instructor here. So just like any other book club, you will have that discussion. What did you like? What didn't you like? What piqued your interest? What made you think about other things in your life? And so on. But you will also get to look behind the scenes of these excellent best-selling memoirs. What we want to help everyone do with this offer is really figure out what it is that you like about these books, what it is that you would like your book to reflect, as well as what you don't like as much. What we want to do is really help you get a sense for what it's like to write a best-selling memoir when mostly we only have experience with reading best-selling memoirs. So with that, I just wanted to kick off some of the reasons that it is so important to read like a writer. First, by distinguishing what we mean by reading like a writer. Now, if we break this down into a very basic set of components, we really can think about reading in two ways. We can read like a reader, or we can read like a writer. The first of these is what most all of us do instinctively before we start a writing practice. When we read like a reader, we really are trying to escape into that world of the book. We are essentially taking what the author has put on that page, more or less at face value. We are going into it and we're just enjoying the ride. Certainly, reading like a reader can be provocative. We can certainly come away with messages and topics and things that we want to talk or think more about. But when we are reading like a reader, we're really looking at that kind of glossy package. We're not really trying to kind of dig in. We're not trying to really ask questions about the book as a book. as much as we are using the book to get at the ideas the author wanted to show us. Now, of course, most of us writers want readers to read our books that way. That is what we intend. We want them to come away not really being able to see the mechanics and the behind the scenes. And in fact, this is why structure from the beginning of your project is so important. The more baked in and thoughtful your structure is, the less it will show to your reader. And that is what you want. We want our readers to really be able to forget about the structure of the pages, the sentences, the paragraphs, and come into our world. But reading like a writer is going to push us to do exactly the opposite of that, where reading like a reader is going to have us immersing ourselves into the author's world. Reading like a writer asks us to keep part of ourselves just a little bit distant. We're just trying to get that intellectual space to really not only see the world, not only enjoy that message, but also to see how the author did that. So, as I said, we're going to be doing this in our Memoir Method book club starting this year. So we would love to have you join. You can come along if you'd like to be guided through that process of reading like a writer. You can sign up at pageandpodium.com/book club. It is a free program for your first visit, and we really would love to have you join us to read the books that we've got laid out for this year. It's going to be really, really exciting. But with this knowledge that we could either read like a reader or read like a writer, I want to break down the 6 reasons that it is so, so important that as you write your memoir, especially your first book, but your entire writing life, that you are also digging into others' work and really seeing what they're doing behind the scenes, really being able to observe and make sense of why these books work the way they work. Now, we did imagine, Emily and I, when we were planning these couple of episodes, that there might be some objections. So let me kind of start with those. And there are 3 objections that come up a lot when we're encouraging people to read like writers. The first of these is folks are concerned if they read too much while they're writing their own book, that they'll start to lose a sense of their authentic voice. So sometimes people will say, well, I don't want to read other people's work because I don't want to be too influenced by it. Now, this is a really, really excellent impulse on the surface, because certainly what we are saying when we say read like a writer, we are not saying that you should be imitating other people's work. Rather, what we're saying is getting into the books and seeing kind of how they work. That's what we want to do, right? Now, of course, we also are going to be observing at the sentence level. We are going to be observing in terms of kind of word choice, paragraph and sentence length, these kind of mechanics at the sentence level. But typically, what we're going to encourage you to do is read different authors. And when we do that, we are not only better prepared to not accidentally lose our voice to imitation of other people we admire, but also by reading different authors, we get to see the way that different authors make different choices. And this is so, so valuable. So if you were hesitating about this idea of reading like a writer because you're afraid you'll lose your authentic voice to the authors that you're reading, let me just encourage you to get a little bit of variety. We not only want you to read with depth, we also want you to read widely. So you don't even necessarily need to be reading only in your genre. And in fact, particularly for folks that we work with who are doing hybrid memoirs, meaning a memoir that tells your story, but also teaches or shows some type of lesson or philosophical concept. When we're working on those types of books, many of our clients are, reading some general nonfiction can be really, really helpful. And I will tell you, as a strictly nonfiction author myself, reading fiction can be so, so valuable for things like structure and also some of the symbolism and fantasy and whimsy that can be a little bit more difficult to find in nonfiction, but that can still be so, so inspiring. So if you're concerned about that, no need to be. The second reason that we hear people kind of resist the idea of reading like a writer is overwhelm. This is totally, totally understandable. When you are trying to write your first book, oftentimes it just feels like there are not enough hours in the day. And when we think about that, I totally get why we would want to say, well, I don't want to put that time into reading. I want to put it into my writing. Of course, this makes perfect sense. But keep in mind that there are other parts to the writing process besides the fingers on the keys part. And in fact, this is something that comes up so often in our group program. The fact that your writing time often depends just as much on thinking time as it does on typing time. So when we're thinking about the time it takes to write a book, very often the time that you spend reading alongside your writing is not taking away from the writing time. Rather, it's enhancing it. It's making you more efficient. It's making your first draft much stronger and clearer, which will save you time in the long run. And it's just generally keeping you motivated, even when there is some stretch of time between your writing periods. But also, we did want to add here, if you don't have a lot of time, we get that. We want to make sure you know, audiobooks count. You do not have to be reading it on the page to read like a writer. And if it is easier for you to have an audiobook going while you clean your house, while you drive across country, whatever it may be, audiobooks count. And finally, the last piece of resistance, I will say we don't hear this one often, but we wanted to throw it in there just in case it applies to anyone. And that is, some folks will say, I don't want to read like a writer because I don't want to read. And the thing that we wanted to just very gently and encouragingly say is that if you are somebody who doesn't really enjoy reading, you don't really enjoy sitting with a book, often that is a sign that writing is maybe not going to be the best match of expression for you. Now, that is not saying that to be a writer, you need to be a total bookworm and always have a book or two in your hands. But rather, if you are serious about writing, and writing a book is pretty serious, it is so important that you are in tune with what is happening in the industry, in the art and creative space, and also just generally on what the shape of a book is. So that is not meant to disparage anybody. If you don't like to read, if you don't like to write, there are plenty of ways to get your story out that don't involve either of those. But we do just want to encourage you to be really thoughtful about that. It's possible that if it is not something that you like to do, to read, you don't necessarily like the written word being in front of you, it might be worth hiring a ghostwriter, creating a series of videos, starting a podcast. There are any number of things that you can do if that applies to you. No shame, but it is worth evaluating, I think, at that point, whether you're kind of working in the right niche for your particular strengths and interests. Okay, so with those 3 reasons that we might not want to read like a writer, let me get into the 6 reasons that you absolutely should read like a writer. So the first reason is that when you read like a writer, you are going to be so much more aware of the choices that that author is making through the process of taking you through the story. Now, of course, we know that there are a lot of decisions that are made in any book, nonfiction to fiction, memoir, any genre. There are so many larger and smaller decisions that are made in terms of how do we move the story forward? What type of voice specifications do we use? How much symbolism? How long do we wait for particular incidents to give them room to breathe while not slowing our pace down? And so on, and so on, and so on. But what I often find is that when we are used to reading like a reader, it's very easy to forget that all of that decision, all of that behind the scenes stuff even happened at all. When we teach ourselves to read like writers, we are so much more equipped to identify the choices that those authors are making, which can be so helpful to your own writing. It reminds us not only that a finished product, a book that we buy off the bookshelf, is not going to be the same as a first draft, but it also is going to help us remember that there are a lot of tough mental challenges about writing a book. It's not just fingers on the keys. There are a lot of thought-based decisions that come into the mix, and oftentimes those require us to be really realistic about where we are in the process. Reading like a writer can really help remind us of that as we're going through all of the steps we need to go through. Okay, the second reason it is so important to read like a writer is it can be so helpful to get us to trust ourselves. Now, this sometimes seems kind of a little soft and squishy, I know, but the idea of trusting ourselves is a bedrock for being an excellent writer. If we cannot trust our own decisions to resonate with our readers, so often we will get out of our writing, creating, expressive space and into our self-critical space. And that is a recipe for quitting, shoving that manuscript in a drawer and never visiting it again. When we read like a writer, we learn to look at the things we like and the things that we don't like. We learn, as I mentioned in the first reason, that as we see those decisions, that author had lots of other options too. And in fact, when we start thinking about that, it very often gives us much more leeway to credit ourselves with being able to make those decisions too. When we can see that authors had to choose between several different paths, which is constant when you're reading like a writer, by the way, we remind ourselves that we also have choices of lots of different paths. And the important thing here is that all of those choices really are meant to just drive the story forward. None of them are black and white. None of them are right or wrong. None of them means a book deal or a failed self-published book. None of them are that serious. When we are thinking through all of these decisions, the absolute most important thing that you can do is remind yourself that you can make decisions too. And reading like a writer is going to help you do this every single time. Okay, number 3 is going to actually seem so obvious to y'all because it kind of is. When we read like a writer, when we read as we are writing on our project, we are rekindling our passion for the written word. Now, this is not true of everybody, but I do find that many people that come to us, to come to Page and Podium, and many people who are long-term professional writers, the thing that sparked their interest in writing was that they read something that really moved them. Now, oftentimes this happens so long ago, you might not even remember it or be able to pinpoint that point in your history. But very, very often, it is seeing the magic of books that makes us want to create magic in books as well. The problem is, when we start to get into our own writing process, there are just a lot of weeds. We are constantly moving from that big picture 10,000-foot view into the literal weeds, into the trees, and trying to wade through all of these unknowns, all of these decisions. And unfortunately, while that is an important part of the process, while it is a part of the process that will build your spirit and your character and your resilience, it's so good, it also can be a little bit demoralizing. It also is a point in the process where your work will not look like the work that you picked up at Barnes & Noble, where your work will look like a rough draft, because it is. So when we allow ourselves to read through the writing process, we're rekindling that passion. We are constantly reminding ourselves of the power and the beauty of the written word, of the creative and interesting and inspiring things that we can do for our readers. We're reminding ourselves of the magic of books. So, reading like a writer is going to allow you to kind of keep that passion kindled. Really remember your why, but in an emotional way, not a logical way. The why that is about driving forward with our very soul and our very being, rather than the driving forward for other people. It's helpful to have both, but when we are reading, we give ourselves that gift of keeping that passion with ourselves and really motivating ourselves through our personal goals. Okay, the fourth reason that we are going to read like writers is to keep our standards high. Now, certainly, just because something has been traditionally published, just because something came out of Penguin, Random House, Simon & Schuster, or whatever, does not mean it is excellent quality. But one thing we do encourage you to do is read books that are in the same sort of area that you want to be. There are lots of ways to think about this. We can think about reading from a big 5 publishing house just to really get a sense of what is the baseline quality here. What are we looking for when we think about a strong structure, when we think about solid movement forward to a point, when we think about the beauty at the line level. Those are things that we really want to keep in our sights, because to reach excellence, we have to be able to identify excellence. And oftentimes when we read some of these big 5 books, it can give us that kind of inspiration of our really high quality standards. But the reason I mentioned that I want you to read in your niche, in your kind of area, is we do not have to rely on those big traditionals to define our quality. Instead, we can be thinking about what quality means to us. And we can keep our standards high by really looking within these books we're reading for the things that that author does really, really well. But also, and this is my 5th reason, you can also be looking for the things that you don't like. The 5th reason to read like a writer is that as you are going through these other books, you will not only identify the choices that the author made that you like, that speak to you. Of course, you're also going to be better and better and better prepared to identify the things you don't like. And that is gold, my friends. I cannot tell you how valuable it is to be able to knock some decision off the list because you have seen it in practice and you didn't like how it worked. That can be anything from structure to sentence level and everything in between. But as you are reading, you are getting such a better sense of what you like and, just as importantly, what you don't like. My 6th and final reason to read like a writer: you're exercising the language part of your brain. Now, this is one of my pet topics, so we talk about this a lot on this channel, but all our language is a series and collection of patterns. We pattern the way that words follow one another. This is why, by the way, different languages have different structures. Sometimes the adjective is before the noun, sometimes after, etc. But we are always thinking in these patterns of language. Now, the more complex we want our patterns of language to be, the more we need to be around complex patterns of behavior. And this makes perfect sense, right? If you think about a baby, a toddler learning to speak, this is very often going to come from just hearing people around them. But babies develop very different senses of kind of language patterns and formations based on not only how their parents speak, but also the types of voices that are in the parent's home based on media, based on books that are around. We are always refining and developing our sense of the patterns of language. And this is just like any other brain activity. The more we practice it, the stronger it gets. Now, you are practicing it in a very different way than you normally have when you start to write. But reading is the perfect oppositional force to the way that we think about language when we're writing it. When we are both reading excellent language patterns and writing excellent language patterns, we are giving our brain so many opportunities to apply and practice these types of principles, which of course makes us all that much better at dialing in the things we wanted to have in our books and dialing down the stuff that we didn't. So, as we are going through this process of reading like a writer, we are constantly developing our kind of standards, how we want our book to be, how we want our writing to be received, and the kinds of play and whimsy that are available to us if we can just be able to find ourselves on these different pages, find our spirit and our inspiration in the words and shapes and patterns of the authors that we admire. So, I will tell you what, we can help you with this. If you are somebody who has been resonating with what I've been talking about, if you are somebody who wants to be able to look at a book you loved and figure out how to pull some of that magic into your own work, the Memoir Method Book Club is literally for you. That is why we designed it, because we see week after week how helpful it is for our clients to be reading as they are writing. So head over to pageandpodium.com/book club and enter your name there, you will be the first to hear about each month's new book, about how we are structuring this program, what you can hope to learn and get out of it, and of course, dates and times so that you can join us and be in community with other writers who also want to read like writers. In the meantime, keep hammering away at that project. We cannot wait to hear how it goes, and happy writing!
You know that feeling when a book just hits you? Not because the story is wild, but because it's shaped so intentionally that it almost makes you rethink your own story. You finish that last page and think, how did they do that? The structure, the honesty, the clarity. There's something under the surface that you just can't put your finger on. And the reason is, unless someone shows you how memoirs actually work, it's hard to translate that inspiration into your own writing. And that's exactly why we created the Memoir Method Monthly Book Club. If you want to join Emily Thrash every single month to dig into an exemplary memoir and figure out what's happening under the surface, head over to pageandpodium.com/book club. Your first month is free, and we can't wait to welcome you to the group.